I inherited my grandfather's 1,000-acre ranch, expecting peace and quiet. Instead, I found a citation taped to my gate, fining me $500 for my own fence on my own land. The Homeowners Association president, Karen Tilmason, had spent years tormenting this neighborhood, forcing an elderly widow from her home over a rose garden, misusing $50,000 from the community fund, and lying to new residents about who truly owned the land beneath them. She thought I was just another easy mark, but she had no clue her entire gated enclave, every street, every lawn, the prized clubhouse, all of it sat on a 99-year lease that had just expired, at least to my family. She wasn't dealing with a frightened neighbor. She was dealing with the man who now owned every inch of soil her little domain was built upon, and I had the paperwork to prove it. When she sent her lackeys to my property at midnight with bolt cutters, I was waiting. When she hired someone to torture my barn, I stopped him at gunpoint. And when she finally realized her throne rested on my land, I didn't simply reclaim what was mine. I opened the gates she'd spent years keeping shut and turned her private empire into a public park. Some people build fiefdoms on lies and control. I suppose you could say I was just the tide that finally rolled in. My name is Stu Proudfoot, and to understand how Karen Tilmason wound up in a state prison, I need to tell you about Dorothy Hendricks. Dorothy was 83, a widow, and had lived in Darkwood County Estates for 31 years. Her husband, Harold, built their home with his own 2 hands back when the neighborhood was just a handful of houses surrounded by grazing land. She kept a small garden out front with roses that had been there longer than most residents had been alive. I learned about Dorothy on my second day in town, before I'd even finished unpacking my grandfather's kitchen. George, a retired teacher who lived 2 doors down from Karen and had made a hobby of observing her routines, stopped by to introduce himself and warn me about what I was stepping into. "You need to understand who you're dealing with," George said, sipping coffee on my porch. "Karen Tilmason isn't just difficult. She's cruel, and she enjoys it." He told me about Dorothy. 6 months earlier, Karen had decided Dorothy's rose garden didn't comply with new landscaping rules. The roses were the wrong type, not on the approved plant list, a list Karen had personally created and pushed through the board. Dorothy, living on a fixed income and struggling with arthritis that made it hard to hold a trowel, asked for an exception. She'd had those roses for decades. Her late husband planted them. Karen denied the request in writing, with a smile. When Dorothy couldn't afford to replace the garden, the fines began. $50 a week, then $100. Within 4 months, the HOA had filed a lien on Dorothy's house, a house that was paid off, that her husband had built, that she'd lived in for 30 years, over a $12 fine for roses. "She's in a care facility now," George said quietly. Had to sell the house to settle the lien and the legal fees. Karen bought it through a holding company, but everyone knows she's renting it out now, makes a tidy profit off the woman she ruined. I sat on my grandfather's porch, looking out at the land my family had worked for a century, and felt something cold settle in my chest. "Why doesn't anyone stop her?" George laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She controls the board. She controls the votes. Anyone who speaks up gets targeted. Fines for a garden hose left in view. Fines for a trash can out 15 minutes too long. Fines for the wrong shade of tan on your mailbox. People are scared, Stu. They've seen what she does to those who cross her." I didn't know it then, but Dorothy Hendricks would be the reason I stopped trying to make peace with Karen Tilmason. Some people don't deserve peace. Some people deserve justice. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how this all began. Grandpa Proudfoot was the kind of man they don't make anymore. Tough as old boots. Hands like worn leather. And he believed in three things: a firm handshake, the sanctity of a property line, and the general foolishness of people who live in fancy houses crammed together like canned fish. He worked this 1,000-acre spread his whole life, raising cattle, baling hay, and minding his own business. I spent my summers here as a boy, learning to mend fences, drive a tractor, and appreciate honest work. When he passed last winter, he left it all to me. The lawyer, a dry old fellow named Miller, who'd worked for my grandfather 40 years, sat me down in his dusty office. "Stu," he said, peering over his glasses, "your grandpa left you the land, the farmhouse, the barn, 2 tractors that probably don't run, and 1 very big headache." The headache, he explained, was Darkwood County estates. Back in the 1920s, my great-grandfather, needing cash during lean times, had leased 50 acres in the dead center of the ranch to a builder. 99-year ground lease, common practice back then. The builder put up a few houses, a road, and that was that. For decades, it was a quiet little community surrounded by a working ranch. But over the last 20 years, things changed. The original homes were torn down and replaced with large, new houses. The community formed an HOA, and that HOA, under Karen Tilmason's iron fist, started acting like it owned the whole county. "They forgot their tenants, Stu," Miller explained, tapping the thick, yellowed lease document. "On April 1st of this year, the lease ended. All common property, roads, parks, shared facilities, reverts to the owner of the master parcel. That's you." I was stunned. I just wanted a quiet life. I was tired of the city. Tired of my dead-end corporate job. Tired of being a cog in someone else's machine. The plan was to move into the old farmhouse, fix it up, maybe run a few head of cattle like Grandpa did. I wasn't looking to be a landlord to a bunch of well-off folks who used summer as a verb. Miller told me he'd sent the required notices to the HOA's legal team, certified mail a year out, 6 months, 90 days. He got the delivery confirmations back, but never a single reply. "They're either incompetent or they're burying it," Miller said. With Karen Tilmason, I'd bet on the latter. He also explained how Karen had gotten away with the deception for so long. Title companies typically only search back 40 or 50 years, and the original ground lease was filed in 1925. Unless someone specifically requested a full chain of title going back a century, the lease wouldn't show up. Kara knew this. She'd been exploiting that gap for years, assuring buyers and their agents that the HOA owned everything free and clear. My grandfather taught me to be a good neighbor. You help a man whose truck is stuck. You share a cup of coffee. You don't mess with his fences. My first instinct was to walk over, knock on Karen's door, and cry to work something out. Offer a new lease, a fair one. Maybe even offer to sell them the common land, so they'd have the security they thought they already had. But my first 2 encounters with Karen told me a friendly chat wasn't happening. The first time, I was driving my dusty pickup down the main road when she flagged me down, leaning out of her spotless white Lexus like she was halting a servant. "Excuse me," she said, not buffering with a smile. "Commercial vehicles aren't permitted here, and that truck is an eyesore. You'll need to leave immediately. I looked at my truck. It was old, sure, had some rust, but it ran fine, and it was mine. Ma'am, I live here. The farmhouse at the end of this road. She looked at me like I claimed to be royalty. The farmhouse isn't part of this community, and even if it were, that truck wouldn't be allowed. I'm going to have to issue you a fine. A fine for driving on what I would soon learn was my own road. The second time was worse. I was repairing a fence about 100 yards from her backyard when she came marching across the field, phone in hand, recording me. Sir, you need to stop immediately. This is a private greenbelt. You're damaging community property. I'm documenting this for the authorities. I set down my post-hole digger and wiped sweat from my brow. Ma'am, this is my pasture. The only thing I'm fixing is a hole the deer made in my fence. I don't care whose fence it is. You're in a designated green space. I'm calling the sheriff. You do that, I said, and went back to digging. That's when I called Miller. I think it's time we introduced ourselves officially. The official introduction happened at the big wooden sign that read, Darkwood County Estates, Private Property, carved letters, a little manicured flower bed at its base. It looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine for people with strong opinions about neutral paint colors. Sheriff Fuller, a man whose face was a permanent roadmap of disappointment, stood beside me, palms hooked in his duty belt. Next to him was Beth, the county clerk, holding a thick folder like a sacred text. And across from us, practically vibrating with indignation, was Karen herself. I just don't understand the confusion, Sheriff, Karen said, her voice dripping with condescension. This is private property. Mr. Proudfoot is trespassing. He's been harassing residents, lurking about, making people uncomfortable. I leaned against my old Ford, took a slow sip of coffee, and let the silence stretch. Ma'am, Sheriff Fuller sighed, sounding like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. That's what we're here to clarify. Beth stepped forward. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, who looked like she'd been filing paperwork since the dawn of time and had seen every variety of human foolishness. Karen, she began, using a first name that made the HOA queen flinch. This is a certified copy of the original plat for the Proudfoot Ranch, filed in 1923. And this, she held up another paper, is the deed, updated and recorded last month, transferring full ownership of the entire 1,000-acre parcel to Stuart Proudfoot. Karen waved a dismissive hand, bracelets jangling. Of course he owns the ranch around us. Nobody disputes that. But Darkwood Estates is separate. We own our roads, our common areas, this sign. A small chuckle escaped me. Something funny, Mr. Proudfoot? She snapped. Just an itch, I said, taking another sip. Beth laid the plat map on the hood of the sheriff's cruiser. It was huge, nearly 4 feet across. She pointed with a pen. This entire redlined area is the 1,000 acres. And right here, she tapped a smaller box drawn in the middle, is the 50-acre parcel designated for the Darkwood development. It was established under a 99-year ground lease. The land was never sold. The builder leased it from the Proudfoot family, and that lease expired 2 months ago. The silence that followed was beautiful. You could hear a bird in a distant oak, the faint hum of power lines. But mostly you could hear the sound of Karen Tilmason's tiny empire beginning to crumble. That's impossible, she stammered. Our lawyers. Your lawyers were sent 3 certified letters over the last 6 months notifying them of the expiration, Beth said. We have the delivery receipts right here." I pushed off my truck. "So, to be clear, Beth, when I'm standing here on this road, next to this sign, I am not trespassing." Beth gave me a thin smile. "You're the only one here who can't be, Mr. Proudfoot. Legally speaking, everyone else is." The color drained from Karen's face. The polished mask cracked. For a second, I saw the vicious, cornered animal underneath. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "This isn't over. You haven't heard the last of this. I'll sue you into the ground. I'll ruin you." I just smiled back. "Garand, welcome to my ranch." Still, I'm a patient man. I sent one more letter through Miller, a final formal offer to meet with the entire HOA board to discuss a peaceful transition. The response came a week later, not from a lawyer. It was a violation notice taped to my front gate, finding me $500 for an unapproved agricultural structure. The structure in question, the gate, on my own fence, on my own land. I thought about Dorothy Hendress losing her home of 30 years over roses. I thought about my grandfather working this land his entire life. The hope for peace vanished. It was time to fight for justice. I spent the next weekend securing my property lines, bought a truckload of T-posts and 5-strand barbed wire, and got to work. I wasn't fencing anyone in, but I was making it crystal clear where the Proudfoot Ranch began and ended. The most important part was the main road into Darkwood Estates. According to the survey, my property line ran along both sides of that asphalt. The road itself was an easement for access, but the shoulders, the ditches, the manicured edges, all mine. I put up a new fence that ran the entire length of the road, right up to the pavement. And at the entrance, where the old unlocked cattle gate used to be, I installed a heavy-duty steel gate, painted it black, and hung a handsome carved wooden sign that read Proudfoot Ranch. I didn't lock it. I wasn't trying to block anyone. I was just making a statement, a very big, very clear, very Meckel statement. It took less than a day for Karen to lose her mind. George texted me a screenshot from the official HOA page, a frantic post from Karen claiming a hostile landowner was illegally blockading the neighborhood and that she was taking decisive action. I knew what that meant. I'd installed a couple of small solar-powered security cameras when I moved in. One was pointed right at my new gate. That evening, I sat in my grandfather's old armchair, a plate of reheated pizza on my lap, watching the live feed on my tablet. Around 11, headlights crept down the road. Karen's Lexus. She parked, and 2 large shapes got out of the passenger side. I recognized them from George's descriptions. Todd and Gary, Karen's unofficial muscle, her compliance crew. 2 overgrown frat boys who peaked in high school and now spent their days writing violation notices for trash cans left out 15 minutes too long. Tonight, they'd upgraded their equipment. Gary was carrying a massive pair of bolt cutters. I was already out the door before they reached the gate. I didn't run, just walked, my footsteps quiet on the gravel. They were so focused on the chain I'd wrapped around the gate that they didn't hear me until I was about 10 feet away. "Evening, boys," I said. "Little late for yard work, isn't it?" Todd yelped and dropped the bolt cutters. They clanged on the asphalt. Gary spun around, eyes wide, in Karen's headlights. Karen, who'd been standing by her car with her arms crossed like a villain, looked furious I'd interrupted her little operation. "Proudfoot," she spat, "you are illegally imprisoning this community. We are removing this unauthorized barrier." "First off, Karen, it's not a barrier. It's a gate. My gate, on my land. Second, it's not locked. You just have to swing it open. See the handle?" I pointed. "Third, if your boys put those bolt cutters on my chain, I'll consider that destruction of private property." Todd, clearly the less bright of the two, recovered his courage and stepped forward. He was a big guy, probably 240, with a neck like a stump and a face that suggested he'd never had an unexpressed thought. "You can't tell us what to do, old man. This is our neighborhood. We run things around here." "It's my ranch," I said flatly. "You're just living in it. Now, I suggest you take your friend and get back in that car." Gary, built like a refrigerator and with about as much personality, moved up beside Todd. "Or what? You gonna call the cops? By the time they get here, your little fence will be scrap metal." "Yeah," Todd added, cracking his knuckles. "We've dealt with troublemakers before, haven't we, Gar?" "Lots of times," Gary confirmed. Karen's voice cut through the night. "Handle this. Boys, I have a board meeting in the morning. I don't have time for this nonsense." That was all the permission they needed. Todd shoved me. It wasn't gentle. It was a two-handed shove to my chest that sent me stumbling back a couple of steps. "Whoops," he said, grinning. "Looks like the old man lost his balance. Better be careful out here. It's dangerous at night." "That's what I thought. Now run along inside, Grandpa. We've got work to do." I didn't move, just stood there watching him. He didn't like that. His grin turned into a scowl, and he balled his fists. "You want some more? Fine." He threw a punch, a big, clumsy, telegraphed haymaker I saw coming a mile away. I ducked under it, stepped inside his guard, and hit him once. A short, hard jab to the solar plexus. All the air went out of him in a loud whoosh. His eyes went wide, his mouth opened in a silent "oh," and he folded like a cheap lawn chair, gasping on the ground. Gary looked down at his buddy, then up at me. His eyes were like saucers. He raised his hands, palms out. "Hey, man, I don't want any trouble. I'm just here because Karen said." "I don't care what Karen said," I interrupted. "Pick up your friend. Get in the car. Leave." Karen screamed from behind her car door. "Assault! You're assaulting him. I have it all on video." I looked at her, my breathing even, my hands open at my sides. "Karen, he shoved me first. Then he threw a punch on my property after you drove out here at 11 at night with bolt cutters. What I did is called self-defense. What you're doing is called conspiracy to commit vandalism. Now get off my land before I call the sheriff myself." Gary held Todd to his feet. Todd was still wheezing, unable to speak, his face a deep purple. The three of them scrambled back to the Lexus like frightened raccoons. As they sped away, gravel spraying from Karen's spinning tires, I picked up the bolt cutters they'd left behind. Nice ones, too. Heavy duty. I'd find a use for them. The sheriff's cruiser showed up at 7 the next morning, right on schedule. I watched Deputy Allen approach my 8 on the security camera. Karen's Lexus was parked 50 feet behind him, and she was standing outside it, phone pressed to her ear, pointing dramatically at my farmhouse. Theatrics were her specialty. I buzzed the intercom. "Morning, Deputy. The gate's not locked. You can drive right up." He jumped a little, not expecting it. I watched Karen's shrill voice in the background, Something about violence and community safety and pressing charges. Deputy Allen sighed the sigh of a man who'd already heard Karen's version and suspected it wasn't the whole story. He drove through the gate and up to my porch, where I was waiting with a fresh cup of coffee. "Mr. Proudfoot," he said, getting out, "I've got a complaint alleging you assaulted 2 men last night." "I figured you would." I held up a USB drive. "This is the security footage from my gate camera. Time-stamped. You'll see them arrive with bolt cutters. You'll see them threaten me. You'll see one of them shove me and throw a punch. And you'll see me defend myself. 1 hit. That's it." He took the drive, turning it over. "The complainant says you attacked unprovoked." "The complainant is a liar, Deputy. But you don't have to take my word for it. Watch the video." He nodded slowly. "Mind if I ask why you've got security cameras pointed at your gate?" "Because the HOA president has been harassing me since the day I moved in. Tried to find me for driving my own truck. Tried to find me for my own fence. I had a feeling she might escalate." An hour later, he called me. "Mr. Proudfoot, I've reviewed the footage and confirmed the property records. I'm closing the complaint. But I thought you should know. Miss Tillmason is telling everyone you're a dangerous criminal. She's got half the neighborhood convinced you're planning to bulldoze their houses. Thanks for the warning, Deputy. Good luck. You're going to need it." He was right. Karen was cornered, humiliated, and out for blood. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. She couldn't beat me with facts or the law. So she turned to the one weapon she had left: fear. She had to create a new enemy to unite her subjects against. That enemy was me. The emails started immediately. George forwarded them, each one more unhinged than the last. I was no longer just Stu Proudfoot. I was a predatory developer, planned to bulldoze their park for a gas station, put up a toll booth, open a pig farm next to the pool. The lies were absurd, but I knew if people heard them enough, they'd start to believe. The real cesspool was the official Darkwood HOA Facebook group, a private echo chamber where Karen's word was law. Another neighbor, a quiet woman, fined $100 because her garden gnome was an unapproved shade of red. Let me see the page. My cousin Frank, who understands the weird world of social media, would call and read the posts to me over the phone, doing voices. It was our own little theater, suburban madness. "Okay, Stu, you're not going to believe this one," Frank said, barely containing laughter. "Karen just posted a community safety alert. She's claiming you've been doing suspicious surveillance. One lady comments, 'I saw him out there. He was just staring at the houses. Very creepy.' And your buddy Gary posts, 'Todd and I will be increasing our compliance patrols. We will not be intimidated.' Stop, so Todd can barely walk right now." "Yeah, well, he's typing tough." It was a 3-ring circus of lies and paranoia. Karen claimed the expired lease was a myth, a forgery I'd cooked up with a crooked lawyer. She said the HOA's legal team was filing a massive lawsuit that would bankrupt me and seize my ranch. People were terrified. They were being told their life savings were on the line, that a monster had moved in next door, and that their only protector was Karen Tillmason. I realized I couldn't fight this one rumor at a time. I had to go on the offensive. "We need to change the venue," Miller said when I called him. "Right now, the venue is her Facebook page. She controls the information. We need to create our own venue, one she can't control." His plan was brilliant. We would call a community meeting, not an HOA meeting, but a public gathering. Rent the county hall. Send a formal, legally drafted letter to every homeowner by registered mail, inviting them to a presentation about their property titles and road access rights. The letter mentioned title clouds, easement disputes, and access reversion. It strongly advised every homeowner to attend to understand the potential impact on their property value and their ability to get to and from their own homes. Karen went ballistic. She sent out a flurry of emails, calling our meeting an illegal sham, a trick by a disgraced developer to scare them. She urged residents to boycott, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That official-looking letter from a law firm had more weight than another frantic Facebook post. On the night of the meeting, the Darkwood County Community Hall was packed. I'd expected maybe half the residents. It looked like the entire neighborhood was there. They sat in stiff plastic chairs, faces a mixture of anxiety, curiosity, and outright hostility. George gave me a subtle nod from the back. Karen and her two remaining board members sat in the front row, arms crossed, attempting defiance but looking nervous, scared. Miller walked to the podium and adjusted the microphone. "Good evening. My name is Arthur Miller, and I am the legal counsel for Mr. Stu Proudfoot. I know there has been a lot of misinformation circulating. The purpose of this meeting is simple: to present you with the undisputed facts regarding the land your community is built on." With a click, a projector lit up a massive screen. On it was a high-resolution image of the official county survey map. "This," he said, using a laser pointer to trace a large, irregular shape, "is the 1,000-acre Proudfoot Ranch, as it has existed for over a century. And this," a red box appeared in the center, "is the 50-acre parcel that was leased to the original Darkwood developers in 1925. You could feel the mood shift. Seeing it laid out in black and white made it real. He superimposed the current plat of Darkwood Estates over the red box. It fit perfectly. The residents could see their own streets, cul-de-sacs, park, clubhouse, all sitting neatly inside the red box on my land. Whispers swept through the hall. Miller raised a hand for silence. "As you were notified, that lease expired 2 months ago. Per the terms of that original, legally binding contract, ownership of all common property reverted to Mr. Proudfoot. Your houses are your property, but the land under your roads, your park, and your shared facilities is his." He clicked to the next slide. It was titled, "Your 3 Choices." The room went dead silent. 1. The homeowners as a collective can purchase the 50 acres from Mr. Proudfoot at fair market value. 2. You can negotiate a new ground lease with yearly payments. 3. You can do nothing. If you choose to do nothing, in 90 days, all access easements through his land will be terminated. The road into this neighborhood will be closed. Panicked whispers exploded into open chatter. People turned to their neighbors, faces pale. Then a woman in the 3rd row stood up. She looked terrified, but determined. "Wait a minute. A 99-year lease doesn't just sneak up on you. Why didn't we know about this? Why did the HOA board never tell us?" All eyes swung to Karen. Miller let the silence stretch. Then he clicked his remote. The map disappeared, replaced by a scanned copy of an email. The date was from 2 years ago. It was from the law firm representing the original developer's descendants. The recipient was clearly listed: Karen Tilmason, President, Darkwood HOA. The email was a formal notice that the 99-year ground lease was expiring in 24 months, and that the board should begin making financial preparations. A collective gasp went through the room. They had been warned 2 years ago. Miller clicked again. The next slide showed a partial statement from the HOA's reserve fund, dated just a month after that warning email. It showed a healthy balance of over $60,000. Then he showed the following month's statement. The balance had dropped to just $10,000. There was a single massive withdrawal, listed as special legal expense contingency, for exactly $50,000. "We subpoenaed the records," Miller said calmly. "There was no special legal expense. There was no contingency. The money was transferred to a consulting firm owned by Karen Tilmason's brother-in-law. That firm was dissolved 3 months later. The $50,000 simply vanished." The room erupted. Shouting, people on their feet, pointing at the front row. "You stole our money," someone yelled. "You knew this was coming and you said nothing," screamed another. But Miller wasn't finished. He clicked to the final piece of evidence. It was a series of email exchanges between Karen and a local real estate agent. A young couple who had bought their home just a year ago were sitting in the back, and their faces went white as they read the screen. The realtor had asked Karen for documentation proving the HOA owns the common land, as requested by the title company. Karen's reply was unequivocal. "Just tell them the HOA owns all land, free and clear. I will provide the standard HOA package. It's a non-issue." She had actively, knowingly lied to new buyers, putting them and their mortgages at risk. The meeting descended into chaos. I stood in the back, watching Karen's empire collapse. This was justice. It wasn't pleasant, but it was necessary. You'd think after the community meeting, after her embezzlement was exposed, after her lies were laid bare, Karen would retreat, lick her wounds, maybe hire a lawyer and try to negotiate. But Karen wasn't rational. She was a narcissist who had just been publicly humiliated, and narcissists don't go quietly. PSP, 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 PSP. George called me 3 weeks after the meeting, his voice serious. "Stu, I need to tell you something. I'm not sure what it means, but you should know. Karen's been meeting with someone. A guy in a black truck. I've seen him at her house 3 times this week. Big guy, tattoos. Doesn't look like he belongs. Last night, I saw her hand him an envelope. A thick one." My stomach tightened. "Did you get a plate number?" "Partial. I'll text it to you." I called Miller immediately. He wasn't optimistic. "Could be nothing. Could be she's hiring private investigators to dig up dirt. Could be worse. I'll make some calls." That night, I sat on my porch with a shotgun across my lap. Not because I'm an action hero, but because my grandfather taught me that when trouble comes looking, you don't greet it unarmed. Nothing happened that night or the next. I started to think George was being paranoid. Then, on the 3rd night, I heard an engine past midnight. The sound came from the direction of the main road, but stopped before reaching my gate. I watched on the security camera as a black pickup, the same one George described, parked about 100 yards from my fence line, just off the county road, lights off. A figure got out. Big guy. He stood there a moment, looking toward my farmhouse. Then he pulled something from the truck bed, a gas can. My blood went cold. He started walking toward my fence, toward the old wooden barn where I kept my grandfather's tractors and about 600 bales of hay. I was already moving, out the back door, across the yard, keeping to shadows. My phone was in my pocket, the sheriff's number ready. The guy was at my fence now, looking for a way through. He found a section where the wire was loose. I'd been meaning to fix it, and started to push through. I stepped out of the darkness, shotgun leveled at his chest. "That's far enough." He froze. I could see his face in the moonlight. Hard eyes, a scar on his cheek, the look of a man who did this kind of work regularly. "Drop the can and get on the ground, now." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Old man, you're not going to shoot me. You know what happens to people who shoot someone in the back? That's murder. You're not running, and you're not in the back. You're on my property in the middle of the night with a gas can heading toward my barn. That's arson. And in this state, I'm legally allowed to defend my property with lethal force." His smile faded. "I'm going to count to 3, I said, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "Then I'm going to call the sheriff. And then, depending on what you do next, I'm either going to watch him arrest you or I'm going to exercise my property rights." 1. He didn't move. 2. He dropped the gas can. "There we go. Now, on your knees, hands behind your head." He complied. I could see the calculation in his eyes, wondering if he could rush me, wondering if I'd really shoot. But whatever he saw in my face convinced him it wasn't worth the risk. I dialed 911 with one hand, shotgun steady in the other. 20 minutes later, Deputy Allen was back, this time with backup. They hauled the guy away in handcuffs. His name was Ray Bostwick, and he had a rap sheet longer than my arm. Assault, arson, intimidation for hire. "He's not talking," Deputy Allen told me, "but we found $2,000 in cash in his truck. No receipts, and his phone's got some interesting texts. Nothing that directly mentions a name, but we're working on it." "Karen Tilmazan," I said. "She hired him. Prove it yet, but we're looking. You might want to stay somewhere else for a few days, Mr. Proudfoot, just in case she's got backup plans." "This is my land," I said. "My grandfather's land. I'm not running." He nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. "Didn't think you would. We'll have a cruiser do extra patrols tonight." Ray Bostwick decided a reduced sentence was more attractive than loyalty to a client who'd already been publicly disgraced. He gave a full statement. Karen had hired him to burn my barn, hoping to intimidate me into abandoning my property claim, or at minimum, to destroy the equipment I needed to work the land. She was arrested the next morning at 7 a.m. in her bathrobe in front of her horrified neighbors. George sent me video. I'm not proud of how many times I watched it. The charges were conspiracy to commit arson, witness intimidation, and, after the forensic accountants finished with the HOA books, embezzlement and fraud. While Karen sat in a holding cell, waiting for her bail hearing, I decided it was time for some petty, personal satisfaction. That Saturday morning, at precisely 6 a.m., I fired up my grandfather's old John Deere tractor. It was gloriously, magnificently loud. Decades of agricultural engineering designed with no consideration for noise pollution. I spent a leisurely hour mowing the pasture that ran right alongside Karen's house. Her bedroom window faced that pasture. Even though she wasn't there to hear it, her renters certainly were, and word travels fast. A few days later, I hitched up my rustiest, dirtiest, most fragrant livestock trailer, the one that had recently housed a few dozen cattle and hadn't been cleaned in decades, and parked it on the grass shoulder right next to the beautiful carved Darkwood County Estate sign. It completely blocked the view from one side and added a certain agricultural aroma to the neighborhood's grand entrance. I let it bake in the sun. The smell became truly magnificent. George texted me a photo of the new HOA treasurer standing next to it, pinching her nose while a group of residents in tennis whites looked on in horror. They've been out there 3 times trying to figure out how to have it towed, he wrote. It's too beautiful. It's on your land. But the best resistance came from studying the old plat maps. I found a 10-foot wide utility and bridle path easement granted to the county a century ago. It had never been used, long forgotten. It ran from the main county road along the edge of my property and connected to the small park in the center of the development. Its path, by a beautiful stroke of luck, ran directly alongside the back fence of Karen Tilmason's perfectly manicured, award-winning garden. In the next weekend, I was out there with a post hole digger. I put up a nice little wooden sign at the entrance that read, Proudfoot Ranch Public Access Trail. Open dawn to dusk. Please keep dogs on leash. I even installed one of those little doggy waste bag dispensers for convenience. Within days, dog walkers and joggers from across the county were strolling happily past Karen's prize-winning roses. Every morning, every evening, a parade of mutts and their owners right outside her former sanctuary. The county board hearing happened 2 weeks after Karen's arrest. The 5 county commissioners sat on a raised dais, looking stern and impatient. The county attorney was present, along with a stenographer. The room was packed. Darkwood residents, local news reporters, the palpable weight of a community reckoning. Karen was there, out on bail, with an expensive-looking lawyer. She had traded her defiant anger for a mask of wounded victimhood, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. A dedicated public servant being persecuted by a greedy developer and an ungrateful community. It was a good performance, but the handcuffs the previous week had undercut the narrative. The hearing began with the county planning director confirming everything. The roads and common areas of Darkwood Estates were unequivocally my private property. Then the floor opened for public comment. Margaret, the grandmother who'd asked the first question at our community meeting, went first. She presented the emails from 2 years ago, her voice shaking with rage as she detailed how Karen had hidden the truth while draining their reserve fund. The young couple testified next. The husband spoke about sinking their life savings into their dream home based on fraudulent assurances. His wife stood beside him, holding their baby, speaking about sleepless nights since learning their home might not have legal road access. George gave a calm but powerful speech about the loss of community trust. Karen didn't just mismanage funds, he said. She poisoned our community from the inside out. Then someone else stood up, a man I didn't recognize, and told the story of Dorothy Hendress. How Karen had driven an 83-year-old widow from her home of 30 years over a rose garden, then bought the house herself through a shell company. How Dorothy was now in a nursing home, separated from everything she'd known. By the time he finished, several people in the room were crying. Karen's expensive lawyer was sweating. The board chairman, a gruff old rancher, finally looked directly at Karen. Miss Tilmason, did you or did you not know that the ground lease was expiring? Her lawyer jumped up. My client is not on trial. Sit down, counselor. This is a public hearing. If your client's HOA wants the county to continue providing services on what is now private property, she will answer the question. All eyes on Karen. Her victimhood act crumbled. She stood up trembling. It was complicated. The old board left things in a mess. "That's not what I asked. Did you know?" And then she cracked. "He is trying to destroy us," she shrieked, pointing at me. "This man, this greedy, horrible man is trying to ruin the beautiful community I work so hard to build." The chairman banged his gavel. "Ma'am, answer the question." She completely fell apart, screaming, accusing the commissioners of being in my pocket, calling her neighbors ungrateful traitors, raving about her rights, her power, her authority. A full meltdown right there in the county hearing. The chairman kept banging his gavel until she ran out of steam, sobbing into her hands. In the stunned silence, he addressed the residents. "This board's position is clear. The Darkwood HOA has 30 days to enter into good faith negotiations with Mr. Proudfoot to secure legal access to your homes. If you fail, the county will terminate all public utility easements across his property. No water, no sewer, no electricity. This meeting is adjourned." The gavel banged one final time. The county's ultimatum was the kill shot. Within a week, a petition to recall Karen as president got the required signatures in a single afternoon. A special meeting was called. The recall motion passed nearly unanimously. Karen Tilmason was officially removed from the presidency. Her 2 remaining board members resigned on the spot. A week later, the homeowners voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. No more board meetings, no more violation notices for the wrong shade of beige, no more fines for garden gnomes. They would form a simple road maintenance agreement, and that was it. This created one last complication: the HOA's assets. The clubhouse and swimming pool were technically owned by the HOA corporation, but they sat on my land. They couldn't sell them to anyone else. They couldn't move them. A committee led by George approached me. They were humble, apologetic, exhausted. They asked if I'd be willing to purchase the clubhouse and pool equipment to help pay off the HOA's legal debts. I thought about my grandfather. Tough but fair. "I'll buy the building, the pool, all the furniture and equipment," I told them, "and I'll pay you $50,000. George looked confused. "Stu, that's generous, but the building alone is worth twice that." "I know, but $50,000 is the exact amount that went missing from your reserve fund. Think of this as getting it back. Use it to make things right, starting with Dorothy Hendricks." They accepted on the spot. The papers were drawn up. Part of the money went to Dorothy's nursing home bills. Part went to the young couple to help offset their legal costs. The Darkwood HOA ceased to exist, and I became the owner of a clubhouse, a commercial kitchen, and an Olympic-sized swimming pool. As for Karen, justice wasn't done yet. Her criminal trial happened 4 months later. The prosecution laid out the case methodically. The embezzlement, the fraud against homebuyers, the conspiracy to commit arson. They brought in forensic accountants who traced every dollar of the stolen $50,000. They showed the jury the emails Karen had sent to realtors, instructing them to lie about land ownership. They played recordings from Ray Bostwick's phone. Not enough to hear Karen's voice clearly, but enough to establish a pattern of communication that coincided exactly with the cash payments. Ray Bostwick himself took the stand. He was a hard man covered in prison tattoos, and he looked utterly bored as he described how Karen had found him through a friend of a friend, someone who knew someone who handled problems. He testified she'd paid him $2,000 up front to burn my barn, with another $3,000 promised upon completion. When the prosecutor asked if he had any doubt about what she wanted, he actually laughed. Lady wanted the barn burned. he said flatly. She was real specific. Said the hay would make it go up fast, and it would look like an electrical fire. Said the old man would get the message and back off. And if he was inside? The prosecutor asked. Bostwick shrugged. She didn't seem too worried about that. The courtroom went silent. Karen's lawyer objected. But the damage was done. The jury looked at Karen like something they'd found under a rock. Karen took the stand in her own defense, against her lawyer's advice. It was a disaster. She tried to play the victim, the dedicated community leader unfairly targeted. But under cross-examination, she crumbled. She couldn't explain the $50,000. She couldn't explain the emails to the realtors. And when the prosecutor asked her point blank if she had hired Ray Bostwick, she started screaming about conspiracies and vendettas. The judge called a recess. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours. Karen Tilmason was found guilty on all counts. The judge, noting her complete lack of remorse and the calculated nature of her crimes, sentenced her to 4 years in state prison for the arson conspiracy alone. The embezzlement and fraud charges added another 18 months to be served consecutively. She was also ordered to pay restitution, $50,000 to the HOA victims, plus the full cost of Dorothy Hendriss's nursing home care for the remainder of her life. They led her out of the courtroom in handcuffs. She was crying, but not from remorse, from sheer disbelief the consequences had finally caught up. She kept turning, looking at the gallery as if expecting someone to stop this terrible mistake. No one did. I watched from the back row. George was beside me, and so were Margaret and the young couple with their baby. We didn't cheer. We didn't celebrate. We just watched in silence as the woman who had terrorized an entire community for years was finally held accountable. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt like a long, ugly chapter had finally closed. As part of her sentence, Karen was forced to sell her assets to pay restitution, including the house she'd stolen from Dorothy Hendricks through that shell company. The court appointed a receiver to handle the sale. The proceeds went directly to Dorothy's care. Dorothy passed away 8 months later, peacefully in her sleep. But she spent those last months knowing Karen Tilmason was behind bars and that the house Harold built was no longer in the hands of the woman who'd stolen it. George visited her and said she smiled more in those final months than she had in years. For a few weeks after the trial, I just let the clubhouse sit. I went in, cleaned it up, took inventory. Nice place, if you were into that sort of thing. Stuffy furniture, beige walls, a list of pool rules longer than the Constitution. No running, no splashing, no floaties without prior board approval, no guests without 48 hours written notice. No fun. It represented everything I disliked about places like Darkwood. Exclusivity, conformity, building walls to keep people out. Karen had turned a community pool into a members-only club where the membership requirements were arbitrary and enforcement was cruel. That was Karen's philosophy, and it had failed spectacularly. I decided to build something different. My first act was to tear down the imposing iron fence around the pool. I rented a bulldozer and spent a weekend ripping out the manicured, water-guzzling hedges that had blocked the view from the street. I wanted it open, welcoming. I wanted people driving by to see kids in the pool and think, that looks like fun. I hauled away the stuffy patio furniture, All that wrought iron that looked expensive but was uncomfortable as sitting on a cactus, and replaced it with simple plastic chairs and tables. The kind you could actually relax in, the kind that didn't require a furniture approval form. Then I called a sign painter. A week later, a beautiful new sign went up. Rustic, reclaimed barnwood, hand-painted letters, the Darkwood Community Center, a Proudfoot Ranch property. Public welcome. I posted on the county-wide social media that the pool was now open to any county resident for $3 a day or $50 for the summer. The clubhouse could be rented for $100 for birthday parties, family reunions, or local club meetings. The parking lot, once the exclusive domain of luxury SUVs, began filling with dusty pickups and family minivans. The sound of kids laughing replaced the stuffy silence. I hosted a big 4th of July barbecue. I supplied burgers and hot dogs. Everyone brought a side. George and his wife came with a massive potato salad. The young couple brought their baby, who spent most of the party being passed around and admired by strangers, quickly becoming friends. Ranchers, whose families had been here as long as mine, showed up in dusty boots and cowboy hats, mixing with folks from town who'd never set foot in Darkwood before because they'd assumed it was too fancy. There were no rules about what color your shorts could be, no guest approval forms, no one checking if your cooler was an approved brand. It was just a party. Margaret, the grandmother who'd first asked Karen the hard question, came up to me as fireworks started. "You know what Karen would have done if someone set off fireworks here," she said. "Find them into oblivion. She would have called the police, claimed it was a terrorist attack, then fined everyone within 100 yards for noise pollution." Margaret laughed, a real laugh, the kind I don't think she'd managed in years. "This is nice, Stu. This is really nice." From the porch of the community center, I watched this new community take shape. I had fought for justice, and what I'd found was peace. Not the peace of isolation, but the peace of people coming together. My grandfather would have approved. The final scene happened about a year later. I was sitting on that porch enjoying a cold beer as the sun set over the hills. The pool was still open. We'd extended summer hours because people kept asking, and I could hear kids laughing in the water. George stopped by with news. "Heard from someone who knows someone," he said, settling into the chair next to mine. "Karen's up for parole next year. Word is she's not handling prison well. Apparently, she tried to start an inmate governance committee and got herself thrown in solitary for a week." I nearly spit out my beer. Of course she did. Some people never learn. She's also been filing complaints about the prison cafeteria. Says the food service doesn't meet her standards. I'm sure that's going over well. About as well as you'd expect. We sat in comfortable silence, watching families pack up from the pool. Kids running across grass that used to be off-limits to anyone without an approved guest pass. A dog bounded past, one of the regulars from the public trail, and its owner waved from across the lawn. "You know," George said, "Dorothy would have loved this. She always said this neighborhood had potential, if someone would just tear down the walls." I thought about Dorothy, about her roses, about the house her husband built with his own hands, about Karen buying that house through a shell company and renting it for profit, while Dorothy wasted away in a nursing home. Dorothy was gone now, but her spirit was here, in every family that used the pool, in every dog walker on the public trail, in every kid who ran across the grass without fear of being fined. I raised my bottle. To Dorothy, Jagorthy, George echoed. We clinked bottles and watched the sun sink below the hills. I'd started out wondering what mattered more, peace or justice. I learned they aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes the only way to get lasting peace is to stand up and fight for what's right. Some people try to build kingdoms on foundations of lies and control. They think power comes from exclusion, from rules, from keeping people out. But real strength, the kind that lasts, comes from opening the gates, not closing them. Karen's kingdom was built on sand, and I was just the tide that finally rolled in.